The dusty convoy rolled through the Afghan countryside as medical specialist Sarah Chun checked her supplies for the third time that morning. At 26, she had been deployed for 8 months, treating everything from minor cuts to life-threatening wounds at Forward Operating Base Kestrel. Her fellow soldiers knew her as the quiet nurse who worked longer shifts than anyone else and never complained about the heat, the sand, or the constant threat of enemy fire. Sarah had joined the Army Medical Corps straight out of nursing school, driven by a desire to serve and heal. Her parents, both doctors in San Francisco, had initially opposed her decision. They wanted her to pursue a comfortable career at a civilian hospital, not risk her life in a war zone. But Sarah felt called to help soldiers who had no other medical support in the most dangerous places on Earth. The convoy consisted of 4 armored vehicles carrying medical supplies to a remote outpost. Sarah rode in the second vehicle with Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, her squad leader, and 3 other soldiers. Rodriguez was a veteran of 3 deployments who treated Sarah like a little sister, always making sure she stayed safe during missions. The other soldiers respected her medical skills, but saw her as someone to protect rather than a combat asset. Staff Sergeant James Park sat across from Sarah, cleaning his rifle for the 100th time. He had been in the Army for 12 years and had never seen a medic fire a weapon in combat. To him, medical personnel were valuable but fragile assets who needed constant protection. Private Tommy Williams, barely 19, always seemed nervous around Sarah, unsure how to act around a female soldier in a combat zone. Corporal David Mitchell, a communications specialist, treated Sarah with professional respect, but maintained the unspoken assumption that she would never be called upon to fight. The landscape outside was harsh and beautiful, with rocky hills rising from sandy plains dotted with occasional villages. Sarah had learned to read the terrain during her deployment, understanding which areas provided good cover and which left them exposed. The convoy followed a route that intelligence reported as relatively safe, though everyone knew that could change in an instant. Rodriguez briefed the team as they traveled. Their destination was Outpost Phoenix, a small base that had been without medical supplies for 2 weeks due to roadside bombs along the main supply route. The soldiers there had been forced to ration antibiotics and bandages, treating wounded personnel with whatever they could improvise. Sarah's medical bag contained critical supplies that could save lives if they reached their destination safely. The conversation in the vehicle was typical for military transport. Complaints about the heat, jokes about the food back at base, and speculation about when they might return home. Rodriguez told stories about his previous deployments, while Park discussed modifications he wanted to make to his rifle. Williams mostly listened, occasionally asking questions about military procedures. Mitchell monitored radio chatter, keeping the team informed about the positions of other friendly forces in the area. Sarah contributed little to these conversations, instead focusing on mental preparation for whatever medical emergencies might await them at the outpost. She reviewed procedures for treating gunshot wounds, blast injuries, and infections in her mind. Her medical training had been thorough, but combat medicine required quick decisions with limited resources under extreme stress. Every mission taught her something new about treating trauma in battlefield conditions. The convoy made its first scheduled stop at a checkpoint manned by Afghan National Army soldiers. The local troops searched the vehicles as a security precaution, though the procedure was mostly ceremonial since the convoy carried medical supplies rather than weapons or sensitive equipment. Sarah watched the Afghan soldiers work, noting their professional demeanor and wondering about their own families and motivations for military service. During the 20-minute stop, Rodriguez gathered intelligence from the checkpoint commander about recent enemy activity along their route. The news was encouraging. No incidents reported in the past 48 hours, though local villagers had mentioned unusual movement in the hills to the north. Rodriguez decided to maintain their planned route, but ordered increased vigilance as they continued toward the outpost. Back in the vehicle, Park began discussing his theory that medical personnel should receive more combat training. He argued that everyone in a combat zone needed to be prepared for fighting, regardless of their primary military occupation. Sarah listened, but did not engage in the debate. She had received basic rifle training during military preparation, but had never fired a weapon outside of training exercises. Her focus had always been on saving lives rather than taking them. Rodriguez disagreed with Park's assessment, maintaining that medical personnel serve best by focusing entirely on their healing mission. He believed that asking medics to fight compromised their ability to provide medical care and violated the principles of medical neutrality that protected them under international law. The discussion became heated as other soldiers offered their perspectives on the proper role of non-combat personnel in modern warfare. Williams suggested that medical training should be expanded for all soldiers, arguing that basic medical knowledge could save lives when professional medics were not available. Mitchell supported this idea, noting that communication specialists often found themselves in situations where they needed to provide emergency medical care until proper help arrived. The conversation revealed the complex relationships between different military specialties and the challenges of defining roles in modern combat operations. As the convoy resumed its journey, Sarah reflected on her unusual path to military service. Unlike many of her fellow soldiers, she had not grown up around weapons or military culture. Her childhood in suburban California had been comfortable and peaceful, focused on academic achievement and community service. Her decision to join the Army had surprised everyone who knew her, including herself at times. During basic training, Sarah had struggled with weapons handling and combat exercises. Her drill sergeants had been patient but firm, recognizing her dedication while pushing her to meet military standards. She had eventually qualified with the standard rifle, though she ranked near the bottom of her training class in marksmanship. Her medical training, however, had been exceptional, earning her recognition as one of the top graduates in her medical specialist program. The convoy climbed into rocky hills as the morning progressed, following a winding road that provided stunning views of the surrounding landscape. Sarah found the scenery both beautiful and ominous, aware that the same hills that created such dramatic vistas also provided perfect positions for enemy ambushes. Her training had taught her to appreciate terrain from a tactical perspective, understanding how geography affected both medical evacuation procedures and combat operations. Rodriguez pointed out landmarks as they traveled, sharing knowledge gained during his previous deployments in the region. He explained how local geography influenced everything from weather patterns to enemy tactics, helping Sarah understand the broader context of their mission. His experience provided valuable insights that formal training could not replicate, demonstrating the importance of veteran leadership in combat operations. The radio crackled with routine updates from other units operating in the area. Sarah listened to the professional communications, learning to interpret the coded language that kept military operations secure while providing necessary information. The steady stream of reports created a sense of being part of a larger military effort, connected to hundreds of other soldiers working toward common objectives across the region. Park continued maintaining his weapon as they traveled, a habit that had become automatic during his years of military service. He explained to Williams the importance of keeping equipment in perfect condition, emphasizing that mechanical failures in combat could prove fatal. His meticulous attention to detail reflected the professional standards that kept soldiers alive in dangerous environments, though Sarah sometimes wondered if such focus on weapons prevented some soldiers from developing other important skills. The convoy approached another checkpoint, this one manned by American forces who provided security for a key intersection. The soldiers there looked tired, but alert, having maintained their position for several weeks without rotation. Rodriguez exchanged information with their commander while the vehicles were refueled and inspected. The brief interaction reminded Sarah of the isolation experienced by soldiers at remote positions, cut off from larger bases, and dependent on convoys like theirs for supplies and human contact. As they prepared to leave the checkpoint, Sarah noticed movement in the hills above them. At first, she assumed it was local wildlife or perhaps shepherds with their flocks. But something about the movement patterns seemed wrong, too deliberate and coordinated for innocent activity. She mentioned her observation to Rodriguez, who immediately became more alert and began scanning the terrain with binoculars. The convoy departed the checkpoint with increased security measures in place. Rodriguez ordered the vehicles to maintain wider spacing and higher speed, while communications personnel monitored all radio frequencies for signs of enemy activity. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as the familiar tension of potential combat filled the vehicle. Despite 8 months of deployment, she had never become completely comfortable with the possibility of being attacked, though her training had taught her to function effectively despite her anxiety. The road ahead curved through a narrow valley where rocky walls rose steeply on both sides. It was exactly the kind of terrain that military training identified as dangerous for convoy operations, providing enemy forces with elevated positions while limiting escape routes for vehicles below. Rodriguez spoke quietly into his radio, coordinating with other vehicle commanders about the best way to navigate the potential danger zone. Sarah checked her medical supplies one final time, ensuring that everything was organized for quick access if casualties occurred. Her training had taught her to prepare for the worst while hoping for the best, maintaining medical readiness without allowing fear to compromise her effectiveness. The weight of her responsibility to keep her fellow soldiers alive pressed heavily on her shoulders as the convoy entered the most dangerous portion of their journey. The first explosion shattered the morning silence as the lead vehicle struck an improvised explosive device hidden beneath the rocky road surface. The blast sent chunks of metal and stone flying through the air, while thick smoke obscured the convoy's vision. Rodriguez immediately ordered the remaining vehicles to halt and take defensive positions as enemy gunfire erupted from the hillsides above them. Sarah's vehicle lurched to a stop behind a large boulder as bullets pinged off the armored exterior. Through the reinforced windows, she could see muzzle flashes from multiple positions among the rocks above. The ambush had been carefully planned, with enemy fighters positioned to create overlapping fields of fire that trapped the convoy in the narrow valley. The lead vehicle was disabled, but not destroyed, leaving its crew trapped inside while flames began to spread from the damaged engine compartment. Rodriguez barked orders into his radio, calling for air support while directing the other vehicles to establish a defensive perimeter. The enemy had chosen their position well, occupying high ground that made it difficult for the convoy's weapons to effectively return fire. Park and the other soldiers immediately began engaging targets they could identify, but the rocky terrain provided excellent cover for the attackers while leaving the Americans exposed in the valley below. Williams crouched behind his vehicle, firing his rifle at enemy positions with the mechanical precision of his training. Despite his youth and relative inexperience, he followed his combat training effectively, conserving ammunition while providing covering fire for his fellow soldiers. Mitchell worked frantically to establish communication with headquarters, requesting immediate support while providing detailed information about their tactical situation and the number of enemy fighters they faced. The sound of automatic weapons fire echoed through the valley as both sides exchanged shots. Sarah could hear the distinctive crack of bullets passing close to their position, a sound that made her stomach tighten with fear and adrenaline. Her medical training had prepared her for treating combat wounds, but nothing could fully prepare someone for the sensory overload of being under direct enemy fire for the first time during deployment. Smoke began to pour from the lead vehicle as the fire spread through the engine compartment. Rodriguez attempted to establish radio contact with the crew trapped inside, but received no response to his repeated calls. The vehicle's doors were jammed shut by the blast damage, and approaching it would require crossing open ground under direct enemy fire. Sarah watched as her squad leader wrestled with the impossible decision of whether to attempt a rescue that might cost additional lives. Park identified an enemy machine gun position that was particularly effective at pinning down the convoy. The weapon was situated behind a natural rock formation that provided almost perfect protection while allowing the gunner to maintain continuous fire on the American positions. Park explained to Rodriguez that eliminating that position was crucial for any successful counterattack, but reaching it would require someone to climb the steep hillside while under fire from multiple directions. The enemy fighters demonstrated tactical skill and knowledge of the local terrain that suggested extensive training and experience. Their coordinated fire prevented the Americans from moving while maintaining pressure that would eventually deplete their ammunition supplies. Sarah realized that the attackers were not simply trying to destroy the convoy immediately. They were implementing a strategy designed to capture or kill the soldiers after wearing down their defenses through sustained combat. Williams reported that he was running low on ammunition after engaging multiple targets during the first 15 minutes of the battle. The young soldier had performed well under pressure, but his inexperience showed in his ammunition management and target selection. Parr provided additional magazines while explaining the importance of careful shot placement and avoiding the temptation to spray bullets at unclear targets during combat situations. Mitchell succeeded in establishing contact with headquarters, reporting their situation, and requesting immediate air support. However, the nearest helicopter gunships were engaged in supporting another unit under attack, and fixed-wing aircraft would require additional time to reach their position. The convoy would need to hold their ground for at least 30 minutes before any external support could arrive to tip the balance in their favor. Rodriguez assessed their tactical situation with the cold calculation of an experienced combat leader. They had sufficient ammunition for sustained fighting, their vehicles provided some protection, and their position could be defended if they maintained discipline and coordination. However, the trapped crew in the lead vehicle represented a critical problem that demanded immediate action despite the tactical risks involved in attempting rescue operations. The fire in the lead vehicle continued to spread, creating thick black smoke that reduced visibility throughout the engagement area. Sarah could see that the smoke might actually provide concealment for a rescue attempt, though it would also make coordination more difficult and increase the risk of friendly fire incidents. She began mentally preparing for the medical challenges of treating soldiers who might be suffering from blast injuries, burns, and smoke inhalation in addition to any gunshot wounds. Park volunteered to attempt reaching the trapped soldiers, confident in his combat experience and marksmanship abilities. Rodriguez initially rejected the proposal as too dangerous, but the spreading fire made it clear that any delay would eliminate the possibility of finding survivors in the lead vehicle. The squad leader finally approved the mission while assigning Williams and Mitchell to provide covering fire during the dangerous approach across open ground. Sarah watched as Park prepared for his rescue attempt, checking his equipment and reviewing the route he would take to reach the burning vehicle. His professional competence was evident in every aspect of his preparation, from the way he secured his gear to prevent it from making noise to his careful study of the terrain features that might provide momentary concealment during his movement across the danger area. The covering fire began as Park sprinted from behind their protective boulder toward the lead vehicle. Williams and Mitchell concentrated their fire on the most threatening enemy positions while Rodriguez provided guidance and coordination through radio communication. Sarah held her breath as Park dodged and weaved across the rocky ground, somehow avoiding the intense enemy fire directed at his running figure. Park reached the lead vehicle and immediately began working to open the jammed doors using tools from his equipment kit. Enemy fire concentrated on his position, forcing him to work while lying flat against the vehicle's armored side. The heat from a spreading fire was intense, and Sarah could see Park struggling against both the mechanical difficulty of opening the damaged doors and the environmental challenges created by the growing flames and thick smoke. After several minutes of desperate effort, Park succeeded in opening one of the vehicle's doors and began pulling unconscious soldiers from the burning interior. The first man he extracted was Sergeant Davis, the convoy commander, who appeared to have suffered serious head injuries from the blast. Park immediately began dragging Davis away from the vehicle while enemy fire kicked up dust and rock fragments around both men. Sarah could no longer remain in her protected position watching others risk their lives. Despite her lack of combat experience and Rodriguez's orders to stay behind cover, she grabbed her medical kit and sprinted across the open ground toward Park and the wounded soldier. Bullets snapped past her head as she ran, but her focus was entirely on reaching the casualty who needed immediate medical attention to survive his injuries. She reached Park just as he was pulling the second wounded soldier from the burning vehicle. This man was Corporal Jackson, who was conscious but bleeding heavily from shrapnel wounds to his legs and abdomen. Sarah immediately began assessing both casualties, while Park provided security by engaging enemy positions that were directing fire at their exposed location. The medical situation was critical, with both soldiers requiring immediate treatment that would be difficult to provide under continued enemy fire. Working with practiced efficiency despite the chaos around her, Sarah began treating the most life-threatening wounds first. Davis had a severe concussion and possible skull fracture that required careful handling to prevent additional brain injury. Jackson's bleeding needed to be controlled immediately to prevent him from going into shock, though his wounds appeared less immediately life-threatening than Davis's head trauma. Park continued engaging enemy targets while protecting Sarah as she worked on the wounded soldiers. His accurate rifle fire forced several enemy fighters to take cover, reducing the immediate threat to their position. However, ammunition was becoming a concern, and the fire in the lead vehicle was spreading toward the fuel tank, creating the possibility of a much larger explosion that would endanger everyone in the immediate area. Rodriguez coordinated the extraction of the wounded soldiers while maintaining defensive fire from the convoy's position. Williams and Mitchell concentrated their efforts on suppressing the enemy machine gun that continued to pose the greatest threat to any movement in the valley. The young soldiers worked together effectively, demonstrating that their training was proving effective even under the extreme stress of their first major combat engagement. Sarah completed her initial treatment of both wounded soldiers and prepared to move them to safer positions behind the convoy's defensive perimeter. However, the open ground between their current location and safety remained under direct enemy observation and fire. Any movement would require perfect timing and coordination between the soldiers providing covering fire and those conducting the actual evacuation of casualties. The sound of approaching aircraft could be heard in the distance, indicating that air support was finally responding to their request for assistance. However, the helicopters were still several minutes away, and the spreading vehicle fire created an immediate threat that could not wait for external support. Sarah realized that they would need to move the wounded soldiers immediately, regardless of the tactical risks, if they hoped to save their lives and prevent additional casualties from the impending fuel explosion. The enemy machine gun repositioned to a new location that provided an even better field of fire over the evacuation route. Sarah could see the weapon's muzzle flash from behind a cluster of boulders approximately 200 meters up the hillside. The gunner had chosen his new position carefully, creating a situation where any movement towards safety would expose the wounded soldiers and their rescuers to sustained automatic weapons fire from an elevated position. Park pointed out the machine gun's location to Sarah while continuing to provide security for her medical work. He explained that eliminating that position was essential for successfully evacuating the casualties, but reaching it would require someone to climb the steep rocky slope while under fire from other enemy positions. The tactical problem seemed impossible to solve with their current resources and the limited time available before the vehicle's fuel tank exploded. Rodriguez called for volunteers to attempt an assault on the machine gun position, knowing that the mission would be extremely dangerous and might not succeed. Williams immediately volunteered despite his youth and limited combat experience, while Mitchell offered to provide communication support during the assault. However, Park argued that the mission required someone with extensive marksmanship training and experience moving through difficult terrain under fire. Sarah finished applying pressure bandages to Jackson's wounds and checked Davis's pulse and breathing. Both soldiers were stable for the moment, but They required evacuation to proper medical facilities within the hour to prevent their conditions from deteriorating. The nearest medical facility was back at Forward Operating Base Kestrel, requiring helicopter evacuation once air support arrived and secured the landing zone from enemy fire. The sound of the approaching helicopters grew louder, but Sarah could see that the aircraft were still several minutes away from their position. The lead vehicle's fire had spread to the point where the fuel tank explosion was imminent, creating a deadline that could not be extended through tactical maneuvering or medical intervention. Someone would need to eliminate the machine gun position immediately, or all of them would likely be killed when the vehicle exploded. Park made the decision to attempt the assault alone, believing that his combat experience gave him the best chance of success. He began preparing his equipment for the dangerous climb, while explaining to Williams how to coordinate covering fire with the other soldiers. Sarah watched his preparations with growing concern, realizing that Park's mission was essentially suicidal given the number of enemy fighters positioned along his route to the machine gun. As Park prepared to begin his assault, Sarah made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She picked up Davis's rifle from where it had fallen during the evacuation and checked to ensure it was loaded and functional. Her fellow soldiers stared at her in amazement, having never seen her handle a weapon during their 8 months of deployment together. Park immediately ordered her to put the rifle down and continue providing medical care to the wounded soldiers. Sarah ignored Park's order and began studying the terrain between their position and the machine gun that was preventing their evacuation. Her medical training had taught her to analyze complex problems systematically, breaking them down into manageable components that could be addressed through careful planning and precise execution. She realized that her understanding of anatomy and physiology might provide insights that pure combat training could not match. The machine gun position was located behind rocks that provided excellent protection from frontal assault, but left the flanks partially exposed to fire from below. Sarah had observed the gunner's movement patterns during the engagement and noticed that he periodically shifted position to engage different targets, creating brief windows when he was vulnerable to precise rifle fire from the valley floor. Her medical knowledge of human movement and reaction times suggested a possible solution that her fellow soldiers had not considered. Rodriguez demanded that Sarah explain her intentions while continuing to coordinate defensive fire from their position. She described her analysis of the machine gun position and proposed a precision shot that would eliminate the gunner during one of his predictable movement cycles. Park dismissed her proposal immediately, arguing that such a shot would require exceptional marksmanship skills that she simply did not possess based on her training records. Sarah acknowledged that her marksmanship scores during training had been mediocre, but pointed out that her medical training provided unique advantages for precision shooting. Her knowledge of human anatomy allowed her to identify the most effective target points, while her experience with delicate medical procedures had developed hand-eye coordination that might translate to accurate rifle fire. She requested permission to attempt one shot when the opportunity presented itself. The debate was interrupted by increased enemy fire as additional fighters appeared on the hillside above them. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly, with the Americans facing superior numbers in advantageous positions while dealing with wounded soldiers and an impending vehicle explosion. Rodriguez realized that conventional tactics would not succeed in their current situation and that desperate measures might be their only chance for survival. Williams reported that the enemy fighters were attempting to maneuver around their flanks, threatening to surround the convoy and eliminate any possibility of successful evacuation. Mitchell's radio communications indicated that air support was still 3 minutes away, far too long to wait given the spreading fire in the lead vehicle. The fuel tank explosion would likely occur within the next 60 seconds, creating a blast that would endanger everyone in the immediate vicinity. Sarah positioned herself behind a large rock that provided a stable shooting platform while offering protection from enemy fire. She studied the machine gun position through the rifle's iron sights, waiting for the gunner to shift position as he had done repeatedly throughout the engagement. Her medical training had taught her to remain calm under extreme pressure while performing precise tasks, skills that seemed directly applicable to marksmanship under combat conditions. Park continued to argue against allowing Sarah to attempt the shot, insisting that her lack of combat experience made success unlikely and would waste their last opportunity to eliminate the machine gun position. However, Rodriguez overruled his objections, recognizing that their situation was desperate enough to justify unconventional tactics. He ordered the other soldiers to provide covering fire when Sarah was ready to take her shot. The machine gunner shifted position exactly as Sarah had predicted, exposing himself for approximately 3 seconds while relocating to engage a different target. She controlled her breathing as her medical training had taught her, applied steady pressure to the trigger, and fired a single shot at the exposed enemy fighter. The rifle's recoil surprised her despite her training, but she maintained her sight picture and watched the bullet's impact. The shot struck the enemy gunner precisely where Sarah had aimed, eliminating the machine gun threat instantly. Her fellow soldiers stared in amazement as the weapon fell silent, unable to believe that the quiet nurse had succeeded where experienced combat veterans might have failed. The single shot had not only solved their immediate tactical problem, but had demonstrated capabilities that none of them had suspected she possessed. With the machine gun position eliminated, Rodriguez immediately ordered the evacuation of wounded soldiers to begin. Park and Williams worked together to carry Davis and Jackson across the open ground while Sarah and Mitchell provided covering fire against the remaining enemy positions. The evacuation proceeded smoothly now that the primary threat had been neutralized, allowing them to reach safety behind the convoy's defensive perimeter. The lead vehicle's fuel tank exploded just as they completed the evacuation, sending flames and debris high into the air. The blast would have killed anyone remaining near the vehicle, confirming that Sarah's shot had saved not only the wounded soldiers, but potentially the entire rescue team. The explosion also served as a marker for the incoming helicopters, helping them locate the convoy's position in the rocky terrain. Air support arrived moments after the explosion, with helicopter gunships immediately engaging the remaining enemy positions on the hillsides above. The enemy fighters began withdrawing in the face of superior firepower, though they maintained enough organization to conduct a fighting retreat rather than simply fleeing in panic. The professional manner of their withdrawal suggested extensive training and experience in asymmetric warfare tactics. Sarah returned to providing medical care for Davis and Jackson while the helicopters secured the area and prepared for medical evacuation. Her hands were steady as she worked, showing no signs of the stress that might be expected after a first combat shooting. Her fellow soldiers watched her with new respect, recognizing that their assumptions about non-combat personnel had been fundamentally flawed. Rodriguez coordinated the medical evacuation while praising Sarah's actions over the radio to headquarters. His report emphasized that her precision shooting had saved multiple lives and prevented the loss of critical medical supplies that were desperately needed at Outpost Phoenix. The successful completion of their mission was directly attributable to her unexpected demonstration of combat capability under extreme pressure. Park approached Sarah as the wounded soldiers were being loaded onto the evacuation helicopter. He apologized for underestimating her abilities and acknowledged that her medical knowledge had provided insights that pure combat training could not match. His respect for her had increased dramatically, and he expressed interest in learning how medical training might improve marksmanship skills for other soldiers. Williams and Mitchell also congratulated Sarah on her remarkable shot, though they admitted they were struggling to reconcile their previous assumptions about her with the combat effectiveness she had just demonstrated. The young soldiers recognized that their deployment experience was teaching them important lessons about the complexity of modern warfare and the diverse skills required for mission success. The helicopter medical evacuation proceeded without incident, with both wounded soldiers receiving advanced medical care during transport back to forward operating base Kestrel. Sarah accompanied them during the flight, continuing to monitor their conditions and provide additional treatment as needed. Her primary concern remained their medical welfare, though she found herself reflecting on the events that had led to her first combat shooting. News of Sarah's actions spread quickly throughout the forward operating base upon their return. Other medical personnel expressed amazement that one of their colleagues had successfully engaged enemy forces in combat, while infantry soldiers began viewing medical specialists with increased respect. The incident challenged traditional assumptions about military roles and demonstrated the importance of cross-training in multiple skills. Colonel Martinez, the base commander, personally debriefed Sarah about the engagement and recommended her for military recognition for her actions under fire. However, Sarah expressed more interest in discussing how medical training might be incorporated into marksmanship instruction for other soldiers. Her analysis of the shooting emphasized the importance of anatomical knowledge and stress management techniques that were already part of medical education. The convoy's successful mission to deliver medical supplies to Outpost Phoenix was completed the following day with additional security support. Sarah volunteered to accompany the replacement convoy despite her recent combat experience, demonstrating her continued commitment to providing medical care to soldiers at remote locations. Her presence on the mission was specifically requested by the soldiers who had witnessed her actions during the ambush. Rodriguez submitted a detailed after-action report that praised Sarah's performance and recommended changes to military training programs. He argued that medical personnel should receive enhanced combat training, while combat soldiers should receive more comprehensive medical instruction. The integration of these skills could improve overall unit effectiveness and survivability in complex operational environments. Sarah resumed her regular duties at the medical facility, treating routine injuries and illnesses with the same dedication she had always shown. However, her fellow soldiers now viewed her differently, recognizing that her quiet professionalism concealed capabilities that extended far beyond traditional medical roles. She had earned their respect through demonstrated competence under the most challenging possible circumstances. The wounded soldiers Davis and Jackson recovered fully from their injuries and returned to duty several weeks later. Both men personally thanked Sarah for her role in their rescue, acknowledging that her precision shot had saved their lives. Their recovery validated her decision to risk her own safety in order to provide medical care under fire, demonstrating the importance of medical personnel in combat operations. Sarah's single shot had shocked her entire squad and changed their understanding of what medical specialists could contribute to military operations. Her actions demonstrated that healing and fighting were not necessarily incompatible skills, and that the same qualities that made someone an excellent medic could also make them effective in combat. The quiet nurse had proven that heroism could emerge from unexpected sources when circumstances demanded extraordinary action.